Hi guys, and welcome back to my channel Living in Canada. In today's video, I want to talk about how you can get your PR, your Canadian PR, even though you don't have any Canadian education and neither do you have Canadian work experience. And you might be wondering, is it actually possible to get your PR here if you don't have Canadian work experience or education? And the answer is absolutely yes. And in fact, every year, thousands of people and more got their PR even though they only had foreign education and foreign work experience. But of course, there are some requirements to that. I want to share a bit about myself here. Initially, when I arrived in Canada, I applied for a PR through the Federal Skilled Workers Program. But unfortunately, that was unsuccessful because I didn't have enough points. But never mind, I and my husband then moved on and we applied through another program, which was the Canadian Experience Class Program. And for that program, by the way, to be eligible, you need to have Canadian work experience for at least 1 year. Only then can you apply. So even though I personally was not successful with the Federal Skilled Workers Program, but it might just be the right thing for you. And because of that, I still want to share my experience of applying through the Federal Skilled Workers Program with you, just in case it might work for you. And also what this video will do for you is that it will help you to get a rough estimation whether or not you'd have a good chance applying through this particular stream or not. But before we start, very important, a very big disclaimer. I am not an immigration lawyer. I am not an immigration advisor. Everything that I tell you in this video is just based on my own experience and on my own knowledge. And my only goal here is that I want to share with you what I've been through in the hopes that it might help you in your own journey. So I eventually got my PR together with my husband after about 3.5 years of living in Canada. And there were a lot of ups and downs and confusing things about the language test, the education, certification, the education acknowledgement, and so on. So there will be a series of videos related to my process of applying for PR, which will be relevant to you regardless of whether you're applying through the CEC stream, the Federal Skilled Workers Program, or even the Federal Skilled Trade Program. So if you don't want to miss out on any of my future videos, then make sure that you hit the subscribe button and also hit the notification bell and set it to all notifications, because only if you do that will YouTube actually notify you every time I upload a new video. So applying for your PR, your Canadian PR, can be very confusing, especially when you're just about to start. And just to orient yourself, I want to let you know upfront that there are actually so many ways to apply for PR. So if you go to the government website and go to Immigration and Citizenship, scroll down to Immigrate, you can see the various ways you can apply for PR here. There's express entry, family sponsorship, provincial nominees, a startup visa, self-employed program, and so on. And by the way, throughout your PR process, one of my most important tips and recommendation is that you always get your information from the main government website, which is canada.ca. Of course, you can get additional information from vlogs or from articles and so on, but the government website will always be your most reliable source because things change from time to time and those other blogs and vlogs might not always reflect the most updated information. So always go to canada.ca to verify your information. That being said, if you are a skilled worker and you're not planning on coming here through self-employment or startup and the other options, then the correct program for you would be the Express Entry program. So you'll see that there are actually 3 programs through which you can apply within the Express Entry program. The first one is the Canadian Experience Class, and by the way, I made a video on this last week, so if you want to check that out, you can click on the link up here later on after you watch this video. And just as a rough overview, basically the CEC or Canadian Experience Class is for those people who have Canadian work experience. So work experience in Canada for at least 1 year. Only then can you apply. But the Federal Skilled Worker Program, on the other hand, is for anyone who is a skilled worker with foreign experience. So foreign experience counts here. And also you must meet other criteria for education and so on. But for the Federal Skilled Worker Program, which I'm talking about today, you do not need Canadian work experience. I mean, if you have, that's a plus. And the last program here, which is the Federal federal skilled trades program is a totally different thing. This is for skilled workers who are qualified in a skilled trade. Just a few examples here are mechanic, a butcher, and so on. So now let's dive deeper into the federal skilled workers program. The first thing that we are going to talk about is about the minimum requirements to apply for this program. And keep in mind here that it's minimum requirement. Even if you fulfill these, it doesn't mean that you are automatically accepted and get your PR. This is really the bare minimum. And the second thing that we'll talk about will be the 6 selection factors. So this is a grid that you can use to estimate how many points you will get to get a rough idea whether or not you are eligible to even apply through this program. And at this point, you might ask me, so how many points do I actually need to get my PR? And we're going to get into more details later, but for now, I can tell you that there is not a fixed number of points, because not only is there a minimum eligibility requirement to apply for the program, but you are also competing with a bunch of other people who are also applying for this program at the same time. So it depends on your competition. It depends on what score or what number of points the other candidates have during each draw. Now let's start with the first minimum requirement, which is related to your skilled work experience. So what does skilled work experience even mean? This basically means that you need to have worked in one of the NOC job groups. And NOC jobs are a certain category of jobs which include managerial jobs, which is called skill type 0, professional jobs, which is skill level A, and technical jobs and skilled trades, which are skill level B. I'm not going to cover in this video exactly what falls under NOC 0A and B. You can also check that out for yourself if you want to. If you click on this link over here, there's actually a search function where you can type in your job, the job that you have overseas, your foreign work experience, and check out whether or not it qualifies under NOC 0A or B. Now let's go on to the more specific requirements in relation to this. Your skilled work experience must be within the last 10 years. This means, for example, that if you were working in, let's say, 2005 to 2006, which is over 15 years ago, that work experience would not count towards this. The next thing is that it needs to be paid work, and this is very important. If you did any volunteer work or unpaid internships, even that would not count. And regarding the duration of the work, it needs to be at least 1 year of continuous work, or in other words, 1,560 hours in total, where for each week you can count up to 30 hours. It does not have to be full-time. Even if it's part-time, there's a calculation here that allows you to calculate the equivalent number of hours. So if you do this calculation, you'll see whether or not you will meet that 1,560 hours minimum work requirement. Interestingly, if you scroll down here, you'll see that under student work experience, it says that work experience gained while you were studying may also count towards your minimum requirements, but only if the work was 1, paid by wages or commissions, was continuous, meaning there's no gap, and it meets all other requirements of the program. I'm not going to go into details, but you can click on this link here if you have any student work experience. Now let's go on to the language requirement. This is a question that many people ask. To apply for the Federal Skilled Workers Program, you need to take an approved language test in English or French for the categories of writing, reading, listening, and speaking. And you need to get a minimum score of CLB 7 in all of the 4 abilities. And I'll get to that a bit later on, what that CLB actually means. Also very important, and I mentioned that in my other video, is that the test results must be valid for at least 2 years. So if they've expired at the point when you're applying, then you need to retake the test. And if you're planning to take a language test soon, such as the IELTS test, which I took several times, I made several videos on this before. There's even a playlist on that, and if you want to know more about that, you can check out this playlist up here. Now let's talk about education. If you have any education in Canada, that obviously can count towards your points, but I assume that the reason that you clicked on this video is perhaps because you don't have any Canadian education and instead you only have foreign education. And in that case, you need to have a completed credential, I'll get to that in a second, and an ECA or an educational credential assessment. What this ECA does is that it basically verifies that your foreign education is equivalent to this and this Canadian education. I'll talk a bit more about what completed credential means later on when I talk about the 6 selection factors. And also a note about the ECA. So if you only have foreign education, and in order to apply through this program, you need to get this ECA or this educational credential assessment, you need to be aware that this process can take a very long time, because you will need to send your transcripts, your college transcripts and graduation certificate to the ECA, but you cannot be the one sending it personally. In fact, your college or your university needs to be the one who sends it to the ECA. And depending on where you studied and how good or complicated your administration there is, it can take anywhere from 4, 5, 6 weeks to months or even a year. So be prepared for that. If you are planning to apply through the Federal Skilled Worker Program and want your foreign education to be acknowledged, then you'll better get the ECA process started as soon as possible, regardless of all the other steps in this process, because that way you will save time. If you do not do this far in advance, this might be the bottleneck in your process. What might happen is that you have all your documents, everything is ready, but you are still waiting for this ECA, and because of that you are late with your whole application. But anyway, I will do a separate video on this ECA thing later on. This is one of the favorite topics, which is proof of funds. Many of you might be wondering, if I want to immigrate to Canada, how much money do I actually need to have? How much funds do I need to prove that I have? So here it says that for proof of funds, you must show that you have enough money for you and your family to settle in Canada, unless you are currently able to work in Canada, meaning that you already have some kind of a work permit that allows you to work here in Canada, or you have a valid job offer from an employer in Canada. But this is a bit tricky, and I assume that the majority of you watching right now do not have this valid job offer, so I'll just skip this one. Let's go over to what money for you and your family to settle here in Canada means. So if you are planning to immigrate to Canada with your family, let's say with your spouse and your 2 kids, then you need to provide proof of funds not only for yourself but for your whole family. And here on the side, they actually have a table that will show you how much money you need to settle in Canada. And this is again the reason why it's so important to always check the information through this website, because things change so frequently. So don't just rely on some blog or even video like this, which is maybe 1 or 2 years at the time that you're watching it. So let's look at how much money you'll need. The amount of money that you need to support your family depends on the size of your family. Makes sense, right? And to calculate the size of your family, you need to include yourself, your spouse, your dependent children, and your spouse's dependent children, if there are any. And now let's get straight to the table. Let's get to the numbers, right? So let's just say that only you are coming to Canada. So in that case, you would only need to prove that you have $13,310. But let's say if there are 4 of you who are planning to immigrate, in that case, you will need to prove that you have $24,733, and so on. And if you exceed 7 people, then for each additional family member, you will need to calculate an additional $3,586. So I hope that by looking at this table, I have alleviated some of your concerns, because it turns out that the number is not that big, right? I mean, it's still a lot of money, but it's not a crazy amount. Okay, this is very important. What do we accept as proof? The important thing to remember here is that the funds must be readily available to you, or in other words, this basically means that the funds are liquid. So if you have any money, let's say in property tied up in a house you have overseas, then that cannot count because it's not liquid. You cannot use it to buy food or pay your rent here in Canada. And you also cannot borrow it from anyone else, whether that's from your family or from your friends and so on. So this is an example of what you cannot do. Let's let's say that you want to provide proof that you have $20,000 in your account, and then 1 or 2 months before you provide the proof, you ask a family member or a friend to transfer you some money, to borrow you some money, so that you can show in your statement that you have this amount. So that you can absolutely not do, and it will be a huge red flag to the officer checking your account, because they will look at your statement and they will clearly see that the money just came in 2 months ago, which is a bit suspicious. So there are a range of other important things about proof of funds, but I will also make another video on that, because otherwise this video will just get too long. One important point that I want to note is, just in case you are thinking of applying through the Canadian Experience class, where you already have 1 year of work experience in Canada, in that case you do not need to show that you have enough money to support yourself. And also, if you're authorized to work in Canada and you already have a valid job offer, in that case you also do not need to show that you have enough money. Now let's go on. The next requirement is that you must be admissible to Canada. So what does admissible mean? And I know that the way these things are formulated is always a bit complicated. So in relation to admissibility, it means that you cannot be inadmissible. And there's a huge list of things that would make you inadmissible, but I will not go through any of them. You can check this out for yourself. In general, what might be interesting to know is that there are other different reasons why you could not immigrate to Canada, which includes things related to security, criminal, or medical reasons, so which makes sense. Now, the last important thing related to the Federal Skilled Workers Program, which relates to where you can live in Canada. So, in case you are planning to settle in Montreal or in Quebec, the province of Quebec in general, then no, this program is not the right program for you. In order to qualify for this program, you must plan to live outside of the province of Quebec, because the province of Quebec selects its own skilled workers. So basically, Quebec has its own immigration plan. Okay guys, now let's go on to the part that I know you've all been waiting for. I can imagine that you guys are really curious to know whether or not you have a good chance to get your PR through this Federal Skilled Workers Program or not. And we're going to find out now through the 6 selection factors. So there's a grid here, the 6 selection factors, which you can also access through this website, that actually tells you how many points you can score for each of the eligibility requirements that I just talked about. But here we are going to take a look at the exact points that you can earn, so you can add them up together and get a rough idea of how many points you can earn. Okay, so immigration uses the selection factor points to help assess your eligibility for the Federal Skilled Workers Program. The minimum score to even be eligible for this program is 67. But very important note, if you get 67 points, it still doesn't mean that you will automatically get your PR. As I mentioned earlier, it will depend on your competition. It will depend on what scores other candidates have at the same time. Okay, note about points here, because this might be a bit confusing. You might have seen this scale of 0 to 100 points, and then you might have seen a different scale, which is 0 to 400, 500, 600, and so on. So what do these have to do with one another? So the first scale, which is 0 to 100, which is used for this 6 selection factors grid, is to calculate your eligibility. So if you have 67 points and above, you are eligible. But once you are eligible and you apply for this program, then you will be assessed with a different system. This system is used to assess and score your profile and rank you in the express entry pool. So this is the scale of points where you can get, for example, 300, 400, 500, 600, 1000 points, and so on. But I will not go into detail in this video. That will be a topic for another video. By the way, guys, if you found this video useful so far, then I would really appreciate it if you'd hit the like button, because that would let me know that this video is useful to you, and it would also help this video to get out to more people. Now let's move on. So if you do not get 67 points, if you score lower than that, then you won't even qualify for this program. So you don't even need to start applying. In that case, what you'll need to do is try to look at the individual requirements and see where you can increase your points. And one of the things that you can do to improve your points is improving your language skills, so scoring higher on your English test and other things. Now let's get straight into the scores. Let's first start with language skills. So for language skills, you can earn a maximum of 28 points. And you can get these points, interestingly, not just in English, but also in French language. To score your English language, they use the CLB or the Canadian Language Benchmark. But for French, they would use the NCLC here, or the Niveau de Compétence Linguistique Canadien. So for your first official language, whether that's English or French, you need to get a minimum of CLB 7 or for French, NCLC 7 in all of the 4 language areas: writing, reading, listening, and speaking. And for the second official language, you will need to get a CLB of 5 in English or an NCLC 5 in French. But remember, you do not need to have both. You only need one official language, and the second official language is optional. So if you look at the grid here, if you have a CLB below 7, then you're not eligible to apply at all. You need at least CLB 7 for your first official language. And for that, if you have CLB level 7, you would get 4 points in all categories. So 4 times 4 would be 16 points. But if you have a CLB level of 9 or higher, you would get a score of 6 in all categories. 6 times 4 is 24, so you would get the maximum points 24. And for the second official language, you can only get a maximum of 4 points. Now let's move on to education. For your education, you can get a maximum of 25 points, which is quite a lot. So if you went to school in Canada, you obviously need to have a certificate, diploma, or degree from a Canadian institution. And if you have foreign education, you will need to have this ECA that I talked about earlier that shows that your education is equal to a completed certificate. So let's take a look at how many points your foreign education, your master's, bachelor's degree, and so will get you. So if you click on this here, how to read your report, you'll get to this list here, a comparison table. And below here, select a point system. You can go on Federal Skilled Workers Program Factor points, click on See Points. And here, let's say that you have a bachelor's degree. So there are different kinds of bachelor's degree. Let's just take this general bachelor's degree, 4 years. And here you can see that you would get 21 points. So let's say you have a master's in business administration, and this would get you 23 points. So to get that ECA, the educational credential assessment, the process is, I would say, rather complicated if you've not been through it, but in hindsight, it's not that difficult. So I'll try to make a video on this sooner rather than later, so stay tuned for that. Now let's go on to work experience. For work experience, you can earn a maximum of 15 points. I'll not go into the detail about the NOC, but directly to the points that you can earn. So if you have 1 year of foreign work experience, which is the minimum here, then you will get 9 points. If you have 2 to 3 years of work experience, you'll get 11 points. If you have 4 to 5 years of work experience, 13 points, and 6 or more, then any additional year doesn't make any difference, then you will get the maximum of 15 points. So now you might ask me, but what if I have Canadian work experience, not foreign work experience? In that case, you actually would qualify to apply under the Canadian Experience Class program. Okay, before I continue, here's a very, very important thing that I need to tell you. Don't make this mistake because it would jeopardize your whole application. When you first apply for your PR, whether that's through the Federal Skilled Worker Program, the CEC, or anything else, what you always need to make sure each time you enter your information is that you will need to prove the information that you put in. In case you don't know yet, when you first apply for PR, you do not have to submit your documents yet. Only after you've received your invitation to apply, what is known as the ITA, so where the government actually tells you that, yeah, you meet the minimum criteria, and within the pool you've passed the minimum cutoff score, then immigration will actually ask you to send in all the proof for every little thing that you declared. So if you said you have proof of funds of $30,000 and you have a PhD and whatever, at that point you will need to send in all the proof. So when you initially apply, make sure that all the information you input is correct. So for example, when you're inputting information about your English language skills and you're thinking that, if I take the IELTS, I think that I'll be able to get CLB 8. And then you take the IELTS test and it turns out that you only get CLB 7. And then A few months later, you get your ITA and the information doesn't match. And that will be a big problem because you input information that you are not able to prove. So before you even set up your application, I would really recommend you to take some time and go through each of the requirements in much detail. Now let's go on to the age factor. So how many points can you earn for your age? I know that sounds a bit weird. So the maximum points that you can earn is 12 points. If you are under the age of 18 years old, then no, you won't get any points. If you are between 18 to 35, then you will get the maximum points of 12. So the age of 18 to 35 is somehow a golden age, I guess, because you're in your most productive age. And after that, sadly, the number of points that you'll be able to earn gradually declines with age. So with each additional year that you get older, you will get 1 point less. And finally here, if you're 47 and older, you will earn 0 points for your age. And that is why I really recommend you to apply for PR when you are as young as possible. Because even by doing nothing, you earn yourself more points than if you were to apply 10 years later. The next thing is arranged employment. If you have arranged employment in Canada, then you can earn a maximum of 10 points. So the job offer has to be at least 1 year from a Canadian employer. And you must get the job offer before you apply to come to Canada as federal skilled worker. And here are some requirements for what the job offer must entail. A valid job offer needs to be continuous. So it can't be something that's just seasonal. And as I just said, it has to be at least 1 year. And it also has to be an occupation that is part of NOC 0 skill level A or B. And below here, you can read for yourself. There are a few study cases which describe in much more detail how you can get points for a Canadian job offer. The last factor on the grid is adaptability, and here, not bad, you can also earn a maximum of 10 points. Okay, what does adaptability mean? So adaptability essentially measures how well you and your spouse are likely to settle in Canada. So these are additional points that either you or your spouse who is coming with you to Canada can earn. The first one is your spouse's or partner's language level. So if they have an English or French level of minimum CLB4 or higher in all language capabilities, then you can get an additional 5 points. If you, as the primary applicant, have studied in Canada previously and you completed at least 2 years of full-time study, then you can also get 5 additional points. If your spouse or partner also studied in Canada in the past and it's at least 2 academic years of full-time study, you can also get 5 points. If you've worked in Canada before and it's at least 1 year of full-time work, you can get 10 points. But here again, it has to be on a valid work permit and also in NOC 0A or B. If your spouse or common law partner has worked in Canada in the past and it is at least 1 year of full-time work, you'll get additional 5 points. If you have arranged employments like we talked about before, you get 5 points. If you have any relatives in Canada, this is an easy way to earn additional points if this applies to you. If you have a relative or your spouse has relatives who is living in Canada, 18 years older, is either a Canadian citizen or a permanent resident, and they are either your or your spouse's parent, grandparent, child, grandchild, and so on, then you can get an additional 5 points. So if you followed all of this and on the side you made your notes, by now you would get a rough estimation of how many points you might have. And if that's more than 67, then you have and if that's more than 67, then it means that you are eligible to apply. But remember, as I said in the beginning of the video, 67 points only means that you are eligible to apply. It doesn't mean that you automatically get your PR. Whether or not you get your PR or not will depend on how you rank within the comprehensive ranking system. And I will also make a video pretty soon on that, so you can get a better idea after calculating your approximate score, what your chances are of actually getting your PR. Okay guys, I hope that this video was useful to you. Don't forget to leave your comments and questions down in the comments below and I will try my best to answer those. Thank you so much for watching guys. Have an awesome day and I'll see you again next time.